In recent years, there has been a growing narrative online that Black Americans are actually Native American, and that this truth has been strongly suppressed. Not only do they claim to be the real indigenous people of the Americas, they also claim that these people are actually new arrivals, fakes, actually Europeans, or even invaders of their homeland who stole their identities. They claim to be the actual descendants of the Mayans, Aztecs, Incans, Cherokee Choctaws and everything in between. To regular people, this is just laughable, but according to them, they have overwhelming evidence that nobody tries to debunk because they're too scared. Well, in this video, and on this channel, I'm going to thoroughly debunk every talking point they make, starting with this hour-long video by the Research Guy. Let's take a look at his thorough research.
It says, simultaneously, the arrival of the time to plant crops, along with a scarcity of food and ammunition, led many Mayans to return to their home villages. So, you know, because we were big on cultivating the land. You know, we were big on cultivating the land, and that's why when you had the Europeans that were first coming into the Americas, that's why when we talk about the tobacco planters, and I posted some pictures of the tobacco Indians. That's what they called them. That was the nickname they titled them, the tobacco Indians. When I posted some images of them, I mean, clearly they were Negroes. I mean, we could see that, but why do you think those Europeans wanted those particular Indians to cultivate the land? Because they understood the land. They knew how to cultivate the tobacco. All right. And so we were always big on planting crops and always big farmers. All right.
Okay, before we even get into the tobacco Indians, did he really just say?
Because we were big on cultivating the land. You know, we were big on cultivating the land. And so we were always big on planting crops and always big farmers. All right.
Yeah, like every civilization on the f***ing planet, he talks about agriculture as if the Mayans were one of a few enlightened people to care about it, as if other civilizations didn't pay attention to it as much as they did. In case you don't know, for the vast majority of human history we were all hunter-gatherers. All year, 7 days a week, we had to sustain ourselves by constantly hunting animals and eating them, and/or gathering nuts and berries. This lifestyle is constant work, there is hardly any rest. When agriculture first became present in Mesopotamia around 12,000 years ago, people, for the first time, had a surplus of food. This meant having a lot of extra time because they don't have to hunt to live, and can instead rely on their surplus. With this massive amount of extra time, people naturally still wanted to do something. That something is what we call civilization. People began to invent permanent structures, money, writing, tools, textiles, art, instruments, machines, social stratification. It's all because of the free time farming gave to humans. So when he says, we were always big on planting crops and always big farmers, he shows that he is ignorant of basic history. Every civilization was big on farming. It wouldn't be a civilization without farming. Now, the tobacco Indians. He flashes 2 images on screen of tobacco ads with black people in them titled, Virginia Tobacco Indians. This is meant to be proof of black people being native. How exactly? Not only is a tobacco advertisement not good enough for the claim he's trying to prove, the images he shows don't prove his point at all. This one depicts 2 white men with a black man in the middle. Now, how exactly is this proof that black people are natives? Where does it say the black man is an Indian? Absolutely nowhere. Same with the second one. Upon Googling tobacco Indians, these are the most relevant photos I found. Where's the proof? Oh, is it because the black folk are wearing tribal clothing? Native Americans wore tribal clothing. Oh, and tobacco is native to America, which when combined. Clearly, these advertisements must be depicting the true black natives growing their native tobacco, which is why they were chosen. This is a massive leap in logic. First of all, again, this isn't good evidence. It's not a document or an attempt at an accurate depiction of Native Americans, it's an advertisement meant to sell. Thus there are a number of reasons as to why they're depicted with native attire. For one, Native Americans also owned slaves. Thus white people could have seen this and used it as some sort of weird advertisement point. If you see this as a weird explanation, just look at this poster again. How is this an advertisement? Because of a similar history, Native Americans and Africans also mixed. Escaped Africans would sometimes find refuge with Native Americans, who accepted them because of an understanding that both groups were suffering under European powers. Now, this is the part where I'll offend some liberals and where much of the confusion comes from. In the modern USA, many Native American tribes do not rely on blood quantum rules. This means you do not have to be 100% full-blooded to be part of the tribe. This is why you see people who look like this, proudly proclaiming their native ancestry, despite pretty obviously having substantial non-native DNA. These are European examples, but the same thing goes for natives of substantial African DNA. This means that you can have as little as 3% actual native blood yet be considered native simply because of culture. I can say a lot of personal things about this. All of us agree that having 0% blood definitely means you're not native. If you're at 99% you're practically 100%. But what about 75%? 50%? 25%? 10%? The point I'm making is even if Europeans consider these people Native American, they are not the same people as the ones in 1492, who looked like this. Likely these people were adopted into the tribe like Kiowa, or they intermixed with the natives so much that the only thing that made them Indian was their culture, not their blood, which is mostly African. If African Americans say they're Native American, they're just as much native as these people. Another explanation could be that they used African Americans as symbolic Native Americans, as the real natives were driven west and or killed, and the African slaves replaced them. A white person can see the population replacement and play around with identities. Finally, take a look at this advertisement. Notice anything? Well, of course, it depicts courageous Aboriginal Americans fighting against European colonists. Except no. Look a little closer. Isandlawana. I wonder where that is. Oh. So there are 4 possible explanations as to why these posters depict black people in native clothing. 1. The association with being the slaves of natives. 2. They were considered native because of their culture that resulted from mixing. 3. Because they replaced the natives they came to symbolically represent the natives. Or 4. Research Guy is correct and these posters do represent authentic depictions of Native Americans. Personally, I find number 3 to be convincing. There are many depictions where natives are depicted as black, yet none of them ever confirm their meaning. They never say authentic first-hand drawing of natives or specify a specific person. If the Research Guy says otherwise, he needs to find one that is actually specific, not just tobacco posters that can be interpreted in many ways. At most this is weak evidence.
It says while Yucatan began to sell Mayans into slavery in Cuba, the religion of the speaking cross helped to rally the most determined Mayan revolutionaries. You see that? It says the religion of the speaking cross. What is that talking about? White man Jesus, Christianity. That's what it's talking about. Because anytime our people did not accept Christianity, they put our people in slavery. Okay? The religion of the speaking cross helped to rally the most determined Mayan revolutionaries.
For some context, around the 1840s Mayan peoples of the Yucatan Peninsula began to revolt against Hispanic population because of land encroachment and mistreatment. It lasted all the way to the 1900s and became known as the Caste War of Yucatan. During this conflict, an alleged talking cross began to speak to the Maya people, telling them God was on their side and that they should continue their fight against the Hispanic population. This talking cross is not at all an example of Christianity oppressing indigenous people. It literally gave the independent state the Mayans formed its name, Chan Santa Cruz, meaning Little Holy Cross. The most hilarious thing here is that the cross had nothing to do with Jesus. They didn't view the cross as Jesus Christ, they viewed it similar to how the Maya gods were treated in pre-Columbian times. It's not Christianity. The Research Guy gets this completely wrong. So while it's true that Christianity was forced upon the natives, this is not an example of it. What it is an example of is again, the Research Guy's ignorance. The text he reads is quite clear of what it says, yet because of his limited knowledge he ignores what it says and jumps to his own conclusion.
That's what happened. And then it says here, it says that the religion of the speaking cross helped to rally the most determined Mayan revolutionaries. Why? Because they were making our ancestors docile with religion. Okay? We always believed in the Creator. We always believed in a great spirit. That's one thing. But religion is another. Christianity has nothing to do with the creator of heaven and earth that we believed in, Yahweh.
This implies he also believes he's a Hebrew Israelite. Oh boy.
It says many Mayan communities, with the exception of the followers of the speaking cross. You see that? Because you had people, that's why it says many Mayan communities with the exception of the followers of the speaking cross, because you had some of those Mayans, some of our ancestors accepted the Christianity. They accepted the religion and became Christians.
The research guy might honestly just be stupid. Just saying.
Some Mayans were even sold as slaves to British plantation owners and settlers in Jamaica. You see that? So if you got any West Indian ancestry, it's a good chance you probably got some Mayan blood in you.
That means your ancestor who had that Mayan blood looked like this.
It says some were also sold to slave masters in the southern states. You see that? Of the United States, especially North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. You see that? Those places right there, if you came from those places, your people probably got Mayan ancestry. North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. I'm two places on here. South Carolina and Virginia. So if you came from if your ancestors came from any one of these areas, from Jamaica, from North Carolina, South Carolina, or Virginia, it's a chance that your people could have Mayan blood. You could have that Mayan blood in you. Spain also allowed the British settlers to cut logwood in exchange for an end to piracy, while slavery continued. You see that? So they were always selling Mayan slaves. And when they were doing this, when they were selling these Mayan slaves, taking these Mayan slaves to different plantations, what do you think they showed up as? Negro slaves.
He provides no proof for this.
They didn't show up as Mayans. They showed up as Negro slaves. That's what they were reclassified as.
He flashes 4 images on screen. 2 of these images provide no evidence. Ironically, they actually serve as evidence against his claim. Look at what they're wearing. Seemingly native attire. Though if we use our eyes, Sierra Leone and the Rice Coast. Wonder where that is. This one is, like already mentioned, weak evidence. It literally only has 2 words, Inca, and exquisite in Spanish. Such a massive leap in logic to use it to say all black people are the real natives. This one is claimed to be Pocahontas' father. It also happens to be a blatant lie, as the museum simply states, cigar store figure with African American facial features and Native American dress, about 1880 to 1890. It also happens to be that the late 1800s is 250 years after Powhatan's time. This sculpture is thus not at all an accurate representation, nor does it even claim to depict Powhatan, although this painting made in the early 1600s is, as well as this portrait of Pocahontas dated 1616.
And you all have to remember that. That's the part you have to remember. Okay, all of these people were reclassified. These people never just stayed under the titles that they always went under. They got reclassified once they were captured by the slave masters. Okay?
I'll have more to say about this in a minute.
But watch this. Let's get another book. Let's get this book. This book is called The Strangler, Fig, and Other Tales. Field Notes of a Conversationist by Mary A. Hood. You see that?
Side note, this book he cites isn't even a history book, it's a book primarily about the environment. It's blatantly obvious that he just looked up Mayan slaves sold and clicked on the first few books that popped up without even checking what they were about. This is an awful way to do research. It's the reason why he had no knowledge about the caste war of Yucatan, and why he jumps to preaching after learning basic things. Literally this step on the Dunning-Kruger effect. So much for the name, The Research Guy.
The War of the Castes, Nelson 1964, occurred a few decades before the U.S. Civil War, and had some of the same elements: an oppressed population of slaves, wealthy landowners, and an agricultural-based economy. You see that? Agricultural based economy. So everything was based off the crops that they brought in. Because, like I said, you already know our ancestors were big farmers. A lot of our ancestors owned land. So they were big farmers. They were big into farming and bringing in crops, and that was their finances and their food.
Fuck it, time to plant some grass. Look at this. I control the food now. Now everyone will want to be my friend and live near me. Let's all build houses, except mine is bigger because I own the food. This is great. I wonder if anyone else is doing this.
It says, in contrast to the U.S. Civil War, the native Mayan slaves, you see that? The native Mayan slaves, the imported black slaves, because of the indomitable spirit of the Mayans, the region reflects a distinct independence from Mexico. And although it is not a separate country, strong separatist sentiments cast the region as different. You see that? It says, I was surprised to learn as we strolled through the museum.
This book was written in 2004. The author physically went to the Yucatan Peninsula and experienced the local culture. I wonder how they're doing.
Secundaria, 7 maestros comanchen cada hora ora, diarios veo, semana lunes show.
Of course he completely glosses over this, and gets distracted by the word museum. He should really take the advice of his own words.
You see that?
Do you see that?
They destroyed not only the Mayan books and the Mayan culture, they took their land and made them slaves. You see that? They took their land and made them slaves. Mayans were often enslaved, often. All right? They even took them on slave ships.
This doesn't mean they were black, research guy. He then plays a clip of a news report where researchers found evidence of a Maya slave ship. He also reads a corresponding article. He acts as if this is exciting proof, but yet again it doesn't prove anything. In his mind, slave ship always equals black slaves. Mayans being on slave ships therefore means they were black. Slave ship does not in fact equal black slaves, but he's too giddy to realize that.
Scientists say the discovery helps to establish a historical record for the descendants of indigenous Mayans whose ancestors had been brutalized and exploited since the days of the American conquest.
Some reality right here.
Now, when I was reading this article, it made me understand something. It made me realize that these people have our history. They have it, because in order to even come up with these statements and make statements like that, you guys have the information. You have the records. They're just hiding it. They have the records.
They're not hiding anything. This is just a niche part of history, so it's not really out in the open. You simply never looked for it. Once again.
It is unclear how many of the dead included Mayan slaves, as they were listed as cargo and merchandise, not passengers. You see that? Why they didn't list them as Mayans? See, we were often called something else. We were often called this. Listen.
I already covered this. These people are Indian primarily by culture, not blood. The same way natives of substantial European descent are also called indigenous. Also, his logic is wrong here. What he's trying to say is that black people were reclassified from indigenous to black and uses Mayans being listed as merchandise as proof. These are nowhere near the same thing. Mayans being listed as merchandise is an example of dehumanization, not erasure of identity. Again, he jumps to preaching instead of taking in and thinking about what he reads.
If you don't put to it, like, you can't, this is 2 and 2. You can put 2 and 2 together and see what I'm trying to say, y'all.
He can't explain his own logic.
Says, did you know the Mayans were partly black? Here's a brief history. And I wanted to bring this out because, like I said, Many people they think we add some sort of color or something to these pictures. We don't have to add colors to these pictures. The Mayans already painted themselves black. This is an authentic Mayan mural. The Mayans were black people. We got to stop living this lie and just tell the truth. All right, the Mayans were black people. It is what it is. All right, watch this. Let's go down to the, watch this. It says the Mayans, the founders of ancient America's most famous civilization, left murals depicting their lives, and all one can say is that they were, at least in part, black. This introduction will focus on the iconographies in question, as well as a quick examination of how this was ever possible. Because as soon as you start bringing up saying that the Mayans were black people, you have all these people running around talking about y'all blackwashing. How are we blackwashing? The Mayans painted themselves like this. Is an authentic Mayan mural you're looking at. They painted themselves like this. We didn't do it. They're the ones that painted themselves like this. And then when we ask questions and say, well, okay, if the Mayans are your ancestors, how come the Mayans were black and you're very pale skinned? But you're still calling yourself full-blooded when we know those Mayans was full-blooded. Why do you call yourself full-blooded if you're not still the same? Because if you were full-blooded, you would be the same color as these Mayans. When you start asking questions like that, they start getting like Scooby-Doo. Well, you. That's how they start doing, because they don't know what to say. They don't know what to say, because it's like you start asking them certain questions, they can't answer it. Because they know they're not the people. Watch this. It says Westerners discovered murals in Bonampak, Mexico in 1946. It says Bonampak, an ancient Maya city, is notable for having a chapel with murals painted around the year 5000 of the African era 800 AD. This is where the legendary people's daily lives took place. As a reminder, when the Europeans arrived, Mexico had a population of 26 million people. You see that? It says after they arrived, only 1 million people remained. Wow. So they killed off 25 million of our ancestors, just killed them. It says the majority of people, including the Mayans, will be wiped out. The Maya kingdom was destroyed by European invasion and assaults. You see that? Wow. So we need to understand, like I said, I just wanted to show y'all the patterns so you guys can see we've always went through this. Look at these paintings. Those are our ancestors. And they'll swear up and down that these people are not, they'll swear up and down it's everything except black people. When you start pointing out the color factor, they say, oh, just because they're black doesn't mean they're Africans. We never said they was Africans. We're not Africans. We never said they were Africans. But they'll say, but so what they're saying is just because they're black does not mean, just because they're very black skinned and dark skinned does not mean that they are the ancestors of today's African Americans, so-called African Americans. That's what they'll say. All right, watch this. It says the paintings of Bonampak are shown below. We chose images that we thought were trustworthy and had almost all of them verified by academic sources. According to Lisa Poe, Yakima.org, they went through as many authentic images as possible and saw the overwhelming number of black people represented in those murals. It says these images leave one to wonder, how is it possible that the Mayans were black, dark people with frizzy hair, and where they came from? The article opined that they were equipped today to attempt to provide the answers. The article pointed to the Pedra Furada in northeast Brazil as the oldest place where the modern man lived in America.
For starters, the website that hosts this claim has been abandoned. This means that this is not a scholarly website, and instead it's akin to a blogging website where anybody can share what they feel like. The guy who made this article has no actual grasp on the Mayans. He refers to the Maya civilization as the Maya Kingdom. It's called the Maya civilization because the Mayans were never united in their history. Instead, the Maya civilization consisted of various city-states and kingdoms such as Aquilu, Izapa, Khmarkaj, Palenque, Tikal, and many more. The reason that all of these different kingdoms are grouped together and called Mayan despite not being united is because they all spoke Mayan languages. Similar to how Spanish, French, and Italian are all related to each other through Latin, Mayan languages like Quiche, Conjobal, and Mam are all related to each other through Proto-Mayan. It's inaccurate to say Europeans simply came in and killed all the indigenous people. If you do a basic study of Spanish colonization, you'll quickly learn the Spanish actually allied with various natives and used the pre-existing conflicts to achieve victory. For example, the Spanish allied with the Tlaxcalans to take over Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. Tlaxcalans and various other native allies outnumbered the Spanish conquistadors by 150 times. Another example is when Pedro de Alvarado, a conquistador, had Coxhical soldiers fight by his side in the conquest of the Quiche. Finally, the following evidence is the largest piece of evidence wannabe Aborigines cite. That these murals undoubtedly depict the Mayans as dark-skinned, black people. And that today's Mayans don't look like the murals, so there's no way they're the real people. Oh no! Clearly these are the ancient black Aborigines they were always talking about and I was wrong. Yeah no, I wouldn't be making this video if I didn't have a debunking. And this one is actually one of the easier ones. So how can I possibly debunk it? Well, it's quite simple. The wannabe Aborigines did a classic cherry-picking of information. What they show is only Mayan murals where the people have dark skin. What they don't show, or what they don't know about, is the existence of these murals and depictions. But I can already hear them typing away. There's way more depictions of dark-skinned Maya murals than light-skinned ones. These light skins are later invaders. Not only do they have no evidence for this, the facts don't support them either. The oldest Maya mural is actually a light-skinned man who is bloodletting, dated to 100 BC. In contrast, the Bonampak murals are dated to 790 AD. Secondly, who said that these murals represented black people? If you would avert your eyes to these murals, you'll quickly notice some very interesting features. Huh. Strange how his face and hands are a different color from the rest of his body. Oh. Once again, why are different parts of their bodies different colors? Why are these three people radically different colors? If you haven't picked up on what this means, it means that the Mayans clearly used body paint. These so-called depictions of black Mayans are really just Mayans in brown and black body paint. If you're still not convinced, I'll let the pictures speak for themselves.
Human presence on the Pedra Ferrada in northeast Brazil has been dated about 65,000 years. When studying the geography of the region, the article stated that it looks clearly at Africa, meaning there was close proximity between the site and Africa. It went further to state that the other objects that were discovered on the continent are of later dates and were discovered in South America. You see that? So when it said right there, when it said they looked to Africa, they wasn't even thinking about no other race because these people were black. They looked like Africans. So they said, okay, these people got to be from Africa.
Upon visiting the Lisipo Yakama website, this is what I found. It's clear the website has a strong bias towards saying Africans were part of everything. It's also clear to me now that the person who wrote the blog post on the Liberty Writers Global website straight up copy and pasted most of the article. This site seems to have cited that the sites at Pedra Ferrada were indeed dated to 65,000 years ago, but did not read the fact that the researchers have no reason to believe the fires were related to human activity. The dates that are absolutely confirmed to have evidence of human presence are those of around 12,000 years ago. There's a possibility that they were human-made, but it's just that, a possibility. Even if humans were at this site 65,000 years ago, it wouldn't prove that the Mayans or indigenous Americans were black, since the findings would only prove human presence. Nothing could be said about the people who were there. Yet the research guy makes an absolutely bizarre connection.
So when it said right there, when it said they looked to Africa, they wasn't even thinking about no other race, because these people were black. They looked like Africans. So they said, okay, these people got to be from Africa.
They looked like Africans. I'm gonna need the research guy to confirm what he meant himself, because there's no way he connected the Maya murals located in Central America that were made around 100 BC and later, to a site in northeastern Brazil dated 65,000 years ago. For as dumb as the research guy is, I can't believe that's what he meant. The article's only evidence for Africans inhabiting Pedra Furada is that, it looks clearly at Africa. Yeah. That's literally it.
It says, America's oldest skeleton, Luzia, is Negroid and is 12,000 years old. And this points to the belief that America was populated by the people of West Africa.
Luzia refers to the roughly 11,500-year-old human remains of an adult woman found in Pedro Leopoldo, Brazil. Her skull shape is described by anthropologists as dissimilar to most Native American skulls, instead more closely resembling people like Aboriginal Australians and the Ida of the Philippines. However, upon doing DNA analysis, it was found that she was only related to fellow Native Americans, not Black Americans, not Aboriginal Australians, and not Africans. So if her genetics are Native American, why then does her skull differ from typical Native American skulls? Trey the Explainer, a channel dedicated to history, explains this quite well, as a similar thing occurred with Kennewick Man.
Studying the bones, Chatters concluded that the remains belonged to a middle-aged man, somewhere between 40 and 55 years old, who was tall and had a muscular, slim build. One of the most significant conclusions he made, which would play an important role in the future, was his conclusion that the skull possessed a presence of Caucasian traits and a lack of definitive Native American characteristics. That is to say, the remains appeared to belong to a person of Old World ancestry, specifically European, North African, and Middle Eastern. Caucasian, in the context of anthropology, doesn't necessarily denote European or white, as it does in popular culture, and this probably led to some confusion in the subsequent media storm, but I'll get to that. Chatters additionally believed the remains to belong to someone who died more or less 100 years ago. The remains were in actuality somewhere between 8.9 thousand to 9,000 years old, a far cry from the 100 Chatters first speculated. The combined age and Chatters' Caucasian interpretation made some, especially those in the media, to suggest that Kennewick Man represented a race or population of white European humans that predated the ancestors to the Native Americans in the United States. This interested some white supremacists and the Odinist, a strange tribal Norse Viking tribal identity, who started to use Kennewick to support European land claims over Native Americans, believing themselves to be the original inhabitants. However, by 2015, methods had perfected, and a study of Kennewick Man's DNA ancestry was released. The evidence showed that Kennewick was not related to Europeans, or Pacific Islanders, or Ainu, but solely fellow Native Americans, with his closest living relatives being modern Native Americans. He belonged to mitochondrial and Y chromosome haplogroups that are both characteristic of the average Native American. The excellent 2015 study titled The Ancestry and Affiliations of the Kennewick Man illustrated that Kennewick Man and a similarly aged Paleohuman, the Anzac I child, share genetic similarities to a lot of widely varied Native American groups, the two sharing a high degree of ancestry with Native Americans from Central and South America. Kennewick was, however, closely related to the Colville Native Americans who still inhabit the general region in which Kennewick was found. Regardless, this brings up the question, if he is so closely related to Native Americans, why then did his skull allegedly resemble a Caucasian so much and not resemble a typical Native American skull? Well, this is the problem with trying to fit prehistoric humans into modern racial classifications and distinctions. As we've already learned with the Ainu, and in 10,000 BCE with the prehistoric dark-skinned Europeans, evolutionary change occurs pretty quickly. The crazy amount of human diversity we have today is a direct result of evolution by natural selection, which favored certain traits such as larger teeth, bigger noses, higher cheekbones, darker or lighter skin, and so on in populations in response to the environment. As scientists often find when examining prehistoric humans from thousands of years ago, is that humans have changed a great deal over time. Europeans used to have darker skin and blue eyes just a few thousand years ago, so it is only natural that something similar might have happened between prehistoric Native Americans and modern ones. And this is actually really common. Scientists often see unique and different facial shapes that really don't fit into modern classifications in Paleo-Indian skulls. Luzia, a 11,500-year-old skull from Brazil, possessed a skull shape that closely resembled those of indigenous Australians, Melanesians, and native Africans, and we had a bit of a reversal situation with the Kennewick Man, where Africans instead of Europeans and Native Americans were claimed to have inhabited America first. Some skeletons found on the Peruvian coast are said to have Pacific Islander traits, or others still are said to have Chinese and Japanese characteristics. Chatters, the anthropologist that to some started this whole debacle, has since addressed this fact, that sometimes the cranial analyses can be misleading. In his book, Chatters noted that Kennewick and other ancient Native American skulls predate modern cranial and racial divisions. Chatters apparently has a graph in his book that illustrates just how flawed it is to try to use skull shape to determine race and remain so old. It compared facial dimensions of several ancient Native American skeletons, including Kennewick Man, and modern Africans, Asians, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, and Europeans. The Paleo-Americans were off on their own on the graph, unclassifiable compared to modern racial divisions. All 7 of them apparently showed more variation amongst themselves than the other groups did with one another. Point being, appearances can be deceiving. Anthropology often teaches us that race is a social construct, and in reality such clear-cut divisions don't exist, and things are way more vague, especially when looking at prehistoric people. Skull shape appears to have evolved and changed in Native Americans over the generations, and varies greatly even between individuals of the same ethnic background. And Kennewick Man, Lucia, and many others illustrate this transition, this weird gray period, where the ancestors of people didn't exactly look like their descendants, and people couldn't be separated in clear distinctions. Although Kennewick Man was a Native American and related to them, he didn't completely resemble them in life, in the same way Cheddar Man doesn't resemble his modern relatives.
Just as Kennewick Man's skull resembled European skulls yet was proven through genetics to be related to Native Americans, so too was Luzia Woman's skull thought to be black, yet proven through genetics to be related to Native Americans and not black people. Also, this wildly popular facial reconstruction of Luzia, used to prove she was black, was replaced by this new study with this one. Luzia Woman is not evidence of black natives. Debunked.
Although genetic studies suggest that the bulk of the original black population of the Americas came from the Oceania Asian region.
Since the research guy didn't follow up on this, I will assume he holds this true. The bulk of supposed black natives got into the Americas via Oceania. He also claims that black Americans are the true natives. Therefore most black Americans must descend from Australasians. This is completely untrue. The haplogroups of black Americans belong to the L group. This haplogroup originates in West Africa. So African Americans trace their roots to West Africa, not Oceania. What's worse is the Lacandon website cites Australasian DNA found amongst some natives in South America as proof of black natives. First of all, this citation completely ignores the fact that the article actively works under the premise that Native Americans that look like this are indeed the indigenous people of the Americas. What do you think? Some Amazonian Native Americans means in regard to South American tribes? The researchers clearly work under the premise that these people are natives. Yet the writers of this article and the people who regurgitate it completely ignore it, instead only focusing on the small Australasian DNA these natives have, and foolishly jumping to the conclusion that it's somehow proof, despite it being insignificant.
Third thing super important to say is that these people are Native Americans. They are most closely related to other Native Americans. This population-wide ancestry forms about 1 to 3% of their genome. Don't think of these people as Australasians in the middle of the Amazon. They're Native Americans and they are most closely related to other Native Americans.
Lisa Poyakama cited a source that clearly states who the real indigenous people are. This Australasian DNA is an anomaly. It's only found amongst some tribes in South America and in small percentages. Modern black people do not have this DNA, and the genetic impact of these Australasians was extremely insignificant. They didn't have any impact on the Mayans at all, as their genes aren't found amongst Maya remains. I wonder what Maya DNA looks like. If you're curious as to why these tribes have Australasian DNA, Stefan Milo made a good video on it. Turns out the most probable explanation is that their genes were already diluted in the Asians that entered the Americas through Alaska.
It says, the article by Lisa Poe Yakima suggests that Black would have lived on the American continent till the Asians entered 5,000 years ago. They opine that it is the mixture between the Asians and Africans that gave rise to the Native Americans.
This is debunked through simple logic.
This image, if you can see at the top right here, this is from the Kansas City Times, page 46. I got this off newspapers.com, okay? Watch this. It says, Ernest A. Houghton, curator of the Peabody Museum of Harvard University, examined some 700 pre-Columbian skulls found in the cemeteries of the Pueblos ruins of the Pecos River Valley, Mesa Colony in New Mexico. This was the largest collection of human skeletal remains yet to become available from one site. It says Houghton typed all the crania and found some admixtures of African traits in the skulls. You see that?
We already discussed this.
African traits in the skull, but that's not even what I'm talking about. What I wanted to read, the part I wanted to read was right here. This is the part that I wanted to read. It says, since has been found in the South American forest tribes and has led to the belief that Negroes and Australians might have been early migrants to the Americas. You see that?
We already discussed this.
It says, Dr. Alfonso D. Garay, director of the genetic program of the National Commission for Nuclear Energy in Mexico, says he has found Negro characteristics in blood tests of Lacandon Indians. You see that? One of the most secluded Mayan tribes in Mexico. You see that? One of the most secluded. So that means these people was not having contact with outsiders. So how did these Mayans have Negro DNA? Because that's who we are. That's who we are. It's not that they had Negro DNA. They are Negro. That's just what it is.
He could have at least done a quick Google search of what Lacandon Mayans look like. And if you still somehow think these pictures are fake, look at this one from the year 1901. Lacandon Mayans had little contact with foreigners until the 1950s. This is before any significant contact. His source says that black blood was found amongst them, and that it's proof black people were Mayans because this blood was found amongst the most secluded tribe, so it'd be hard for black blood to get in there. For starters, this is simply a bad source. It comes from the 1970s. You don't have to be a genius to know that genetic analysis has gotten better over the past 40 years, and that more recent studies are far more reliable than whatever people were doing in the 70s. Instead of the source coming from a scientific journal, it comes from a local newspaper. Research Guy needs to provide the actual scientific report. Well, not that it would help him much, since recent genetic studies have already confirmed modern Mayans to be the descendants of the ancient Mayans. The paper doesn't elaborate what it means by black characteristics. How significant are they? It also doesn't say this blood is pre-Columbian. It could have easily came from post-Columbian Africans. Regardless, once again the research guy ignores what the paper implies, that the Lacandon Mayans' DNA is mostly non-black. Black characteristics heavily implies the black DNA is a small amount. Using common sense, the Lacandon Mayans' DNA is mostly, once again, Native American, but research guy just ignores this to focus on the small amount of black DNA. And again, does this black DNA even exist? Is it pre-Columbian? Provide a better source, research guy.
And people don't want to admit that portion about us. It says Negro skulls are also said to have been found in the deep layers in Argentina, in Brazil, and in the caves in the Bahamas. You see that? And in the caves in the Bahamas. This is I got this from newspapers.com, okay? That's where it came from. People try to make it seem like I typed this up at home or something. No, this came directly from newspapers.com. Okay?
He defends this newspaper clipping as if it's good evidence. Ha ha.
The best documentation to give, to put out there for everybody so that everyone knows who they are, is documentation directly from Martin Luther King. And in Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, third paragraph, and as you see I marked it here for you, third paragraph, it makes it very clear on who we are. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself an exile in his own land.
100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society, finds himself in exile in his own land.
So, Martin Luther King didn't say exile in Africa or as a captive in a foreign land. He didn't say as an African living in a land. He said exile. And as people, we are still living and being considered a nation in exile within a nation.
Her claim here is that in the quote, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. Martin Luther is clearly saying that black people are indigenous because he specifically said, exiled in his own land. Again, this is an issue of interpretation. His own land does not necessarily mean that black people are the original owners. It could also mean that the communities and cities they live in that are predominantly black are not safe for them. Those spaces are theirs because they make up the majority of the population, and despite being the majority, they're still mistreated, hence, exiled in his own land.
There is no such thing as
Oh, now you thought I was done? I don't just think that the interpretation I made is the right one, I know so. Martin Luther made a speech at the International Cultural Evening on the 100th birthday of Du Bois at Carnegie Hall on February 23, 1968. In it, he said the following. But he was in exile only to the land of his birth. He died at home in Africa among his cherished ancestors, and he was ignored by a pathetically ignorant America but not by history. He recognized the importance of the bonds between American Negroes and the land of their ancestors, and he extended his activities to African affairs. Martin Luther never claimed black people were Native Americans. He clearly acknowledged his African roots.
There is no such thing as half Indian. All descendants from American Indian women are Negroes.
She provides no proof for this.
But that means, what does that mean? What was Martin Luther King saying? He was saying that he was indigenous. So how come in 1963 everybody understood that Negro people were the Indians, and by 1993, 73, we had now became Africans?
There was no widespread consensus that black Americans were indigenous in the first place.
To change our ethnic identity to African, where did this agenda come from? Well, the agenda actually goes back all the way to the 1890s, in which our own beloved, that many black historians call to, Frederick Douglass, made a comment about. And I tell people to refer to Frederick Douglass, The Folly of Colonialization, in which Frederick Douglass says it is a proposition to colonize the colored people of America in Africa. What does that mean? It means that they want to make the indigenous American people defraud themselves and move voluntarily into Africa.
No, it doesn't. Frederick Douglass here was talking about how he thinks relocating black Americans to Africa is a bad idea because of how impracticable and evil it is. He believes it to be evil because it will just be colonization of the native Africans by black Americans, effectively turning black people against each other. Listen to this paragraph. They tell us that we owe something to our native land. This sounds well. But when the fact is brought to view, which should never be forgotten, that a man can only name one native land, and that is the land in which he is born, the bottom falls entirely out of this sentimental argument. This means that according to Douglass, one's native land is the one he's born into. Again from Douglass, all this native land talk, however, is nonsense. The native land of the American Negro is America. His bones, his muscles, his sinews, are all American. His ancestors for 270 years have lived and labored and died, on American soil. He says it himself, the native land of the black people is America because he was born onto it and his ancestors worked on it for only 270 years. Not because the black man was already there, aka he doesn't believe he's an indigenous American.
For all Negro descendants to register so that they can be counted as indigenous Americans.
I found the source of this image. It comes from this book with a long title by Catlin, George. These are the images contained inside.
It's not hard. It's a simple step.
I couldn't find the source for this image.
Anybody, especially anybody born after 1950. Because as we know, if in 1963, all of us, all our elders knew that they were Indian.
Did they really?
The question is, why didn't they tell the generations after that what their birthright was?
Perhaps because they weren't indigenous. Just a thought.
And the greatest legacy we have is our heritage. All black American people are the American Indian. Period. And the racial identity of all Indians is brown skin with beautiful curly hair from every level of wavy to the curliest of curl. And as you see, you look at this beautiful sister. She's 10,000 years old, found right here in America. All right? She is one of us. Think about it. I know this sister, her descendant who looks just like her, living today in Atlanta, Georgia. So it's just to show that we've been in America for thousands upon thousands of years.
The quality of this image is so atrocious I couldn't find a source on it. I tried Googling it too and couldn't find it. My guess is that it was probably another story like Luzia. And I have my own 2 cents to throw in.
So if anyone tells anyone that they are not indigenous, then you bring them back to Martin Luther King. Because Martin Luther King represented indigenous people on his homeland as an indigenous American man. We are not black Americans. We are indigenous Americans. And America is us.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
Well, that's the end of that video. You'll notice that some portions of the original video were cut out. This is because a lot of it was just him preaching and rambling and generally unimportant stuff. Here's a compilation.
Our Mayan ancestors, these people fought and died and bled for their freedom. That's something that we don't do today. We don't fight for our freedom. We just lie down in our shame today. We don't fight for anything. Our ancestors were different. They didn't take no crap. They was like, we're gonna fight and we don't care if we have to die for it. And that's what they believed in. And now it's always the same. It's the same people, the Spanish, the British, the French, all right? All these people come in, colonize, subjugate the people, and that's how it's always been. It's always been like that. It's the same people. Those militias, however, could not decisively defeat the revolutionaries. So their government couldn't defeat us either. They had the history. That's what it is. And you see that? I told you, our ancestors were willing to fight. That's the difference. You see that? It was so crazy. Our ancestors committed suicide. They worked long hours without showing fatigue. You see that? They worked long hours without showing fatigue. Did you see that? 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 You see that?
The research guy said something that caught my attention.
When you start asking questions like that, they start getting like Scooby-Doo. Well, you. That's how they start doing, because they don't know what to say. They don't know what to say, because it's like you start asking them certain questions, they can't answer it.
I already answered his, so I'll ask my own. Why does Guatemala, the Maya heartland, have only a 1 to 2% black population? If the Mayans were black, obviously then Guatemala should be full of black people today, yet it's one of the lowest in Latin America. Why do no black Americans speak any of the indigenous Maya languages? Why are the only ones who speak the Maya languages the supposed Fake Mongolians. Did we steal your language? What is your source on light-skinned Asian invasions? What is your source on DNA ancestry? Apart from these questions, I'd also like you to address the points I made in this video. Because this is the first video I have edited and posted to YouTube, some of the editing might be sloppy and I might have not included as much information as I wanted to. I'll be posting more debunkings in the future. Goodbye for now.